Last Saturday, most of the American press was focused on the House of Representatives as they were voting primarily on a large aid package bill for Ukraine that had been really delayed for a half a year. And a lot of anxiety about that. We've actually talked about it earlier today on our show, and we'll be talking about it some more later this afternoon as well. But kind of in the background of that was a pretty substantial bill also for the state of Israel on top of everything we've already done. There was a $26 billion aid package that was funded on Saturday by the House of Representatives for Israel. And so far as I've been able to tell, there are no strings attached with this money. It is just free and clear, even though there are many issues that are roiling beneath, around, and under the surface of that war. And we're going to bring on Matthew Hoh, the executive, no, not the executive producer. Whatever. I'm sorry, the
associate director.
Associate director. But I would like to make you the executive director. I mean, why not?
I don't want that responsibility. I don't want that responsibility. So, yeah.
For the Eisenhower Media Network, also former State Department official, former combat Marine, and all around great human being. So welcome back to the show again, Matt, even though I messed up your intro.
It's good to see you, Danny. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're always grateful to have you on and try to unpack a lot of this stuff going on. First of all, even before I get into some of the specific details here, we're going to kind of look at today, what is this money exactly funding? What is America supposed to get out of this, and what is the purpose and all that? But just kind of, first of all, I just want your kind of reaction when you heard 26 billion, because that was frankly more than I thought it was going to be. And the fact that all the focus was on the Russia-Ukraine situation, hardly any debate in the public was on how much or whether we should even give this to Israel. What were your thoughts when you first heard about this thing being passed?
Right. Well, my first thought was in this whole week, as you and I discussed the other day, this whole week where Congress assaulted both the First and the Fourth Amendments, as well as having these spending packages. My first thoughts were, of course, like, Congress doesn't seem to do much, but when they do, when they do, it can be really impactful. And this is the importance of electoral politics, unfortunately. That $26 billion for Israel. Yeah, that shocked me when I saw that announcement. And then you break it apart and you see it's what essentially they had done was they had taken the $9 billion that the administration wanted for humanitarian aid, and they packed that into Israel's line. So that Israel's line went from being 14 billion to 26 billion. There's other monies in there as well. I'm not sure how it went that far because the humanitarian aid bill is 9 billion and 9 plus 14 is not 26. But I'm not a
math has never been a big strong suit of the Congress, I guess we have to say.
Yeah, exactly. So there's other monies that are lumped into it. It could be that maybe the other money, that's where they put this original funding package going back a few months, had an extra $3 or $4 billion to build out our submarine industrial capacity, right? Our submarine manufacturing. So this original package of several months ago had $3 or $4 billion going to the shipyards in Connecticut to improve the infrastructure we have there to build submarines. Maybe that was it. That make more sense to put that with the China-Taiwan package because that's what those subs are for. But with these two major items in the Israel line, one is that, $14 billion for Israel's military. That's simple. And then the other is $9 billion from humanitarian aid throughout the region that I am unsure how that money will be dispensed because primarily before you had UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, as the prime mechanism to move aid in that region among the Palestinian people throughout not just Gaza and the West Bank, but also into the refugee camps in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Jordan. And so I'm not sure how they're going to move that money. I imagine it's going to go through a whole bunch of Western NGOs. And so that $9 billion will, 40% of that will go to their overhead, right? I mean, that's one of the great scams, one of the great rackets of the development industry. It's really no different in the military industrial complex in many ways. But also, too, what's really important to note about that aid package, one, it does not authorize the United States to give money to UNRWA until at least 2025. And right before we came on, the United Nations presented their investigation into UNRWA, spurred by the Israeli allegations that UNRWA had aided in the October 7th attacks. And the main thing that comes out of it is a thing that we've known for all these months. Israel has provided no evidence. All they've done is accused 12 out of 30,000 UNRWA members of taking part in the October 7th attacks. But to this day, 3 months later, they still have not provided any evidence. So that came out earlier. But the other thing that's really important in that aid package there, in the humanitarian assistance package, is that if it's the same thing as we saw in the fall, that money includes money to resettle Palestinians. And so
wait. This money we just passed includes money to resettle Palestinians?
If within the humanitarian aid bill that was passed as part of the Israeli bill that was passed, that $9 billion, within that, there is money to resettle Palestinians. The way it's phrased is to provide for accommodations for displaced persons. And it runs, I'm trying to remember if it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars or the low billions. I think it's in the high hundreds of millions of dollars that were allocated for that purpose. And that idea being is that going to be an enormous tent camp in Egypt? Is it going to be shipping the Palestinians to other countries and the U.S. footing the bill for that? Right. I mean, so there's all types of questions as to.
So is it the case, because I haven't seen any of that language, is it the case to where it could be the money could be spent to build 10 cities in Gaza, in the rubble of Rafah or whatever, or it could be somewhere in Egypt or Jordan or anywhere else? It just doesn't specify. So it leaves the door open. Leaves
the door open. And the original concern about it that I have not seen raised since, but it was raised quite a bit in the October, November, December timeframe, was that the way it was put in the bill, it made it seem as if it was for resettlement outside of Gaza. Right. And this has always been the Israeli plan, right? Right. This is what ethnic cleansing is. And then you go back, you tie in this idea, we're building a pier there, and you can go back and you see plenty of Israeli statements in the fall about how we want to ship people out. And this idea that we know that the Israelis have been running around the world, through their embassies, basically, trying to get countries to sign up to take tranches of Palestinians. So we'll take 50,000, I'll take 150,000, whatever. And then the idea being the U.S., of course, is supportive of that. The idea is that the United States would say, say, for example, Ecuador, if you take 100,000 Palestinians, we'll give you $100 million.
So
that's how it's worked in the past. That's how they do these. They've done similar things in the past. There's no reason to believe that they wouldn't do it.
So they're seeking that. Have you heard if there's been any takers?
No, I have not. And I've not seen really any updates on that recently. But
you just know they're seeking it.
Yeah, they're seeking. And certainly a few months ago, there were reports of this, and there were people commentating on it and some reporting on it. But there's no reason to believe that that type of because it was an embarrassment.
Yeah,
for the Israelis, that there was nobody who was willing to say, we'll take this. But to believe that it's not continuing to be pressed, particularly that the United States, would certainly be feasible or amenable to the idea of, they would call it voluntary migration. Right. So.
Right. Well, that just continues a long tradition, a bad one that you and I have talked about several times before, of where the U.S. may come out and say, this is our policy, this is our preference, this is what we want to happen. And then Israel sticks it in our face. I mean, that happens so many times, and they do whatever they want despite that. One of the things I was concerned about at the beginning here when I first heard this number was the fact that there, at least as what's reported, no strings of any sort attached.
Right.
But that doesn't hide the fact that these stick it in your face kind of things keep happening. I got some pretty stark examples to show you today. First of all, here's Secretary Blinken a few days ago talking about how we need a ceasefire, and it's not Israel's fault, it's Hamas's fault.
The only thing standing between the Gazan people and a ceasefire is Hamas. It's rejected generous proposals from Israel. It seems more interested in a regional conflict than it is in a ceasefire that would immediately improve the lives of the Palestinian people.
Now, we're going to have one of your favorites talk about that characterization of a generous offer by Israel from one of your faves, Marwan Bishara,
Oh, good.
who yesterday said this.
Oh, you weren't being facetious. Okay, good.
Roll it, Gary.
Everything seems to be gloomy, dark, and tragic nowadays. But I couldn't help but laugh today, listening to Secretary Blinken's press conference when he said, in the context of only Hamas stands between Gazans and a ceasefire, he said it's Hamas's fault because Hamas rejected Israel's, quote, wait for it, generous offer. Generous offer. Generous offer does not include ceasefire. It does not. It does not include ending the war, ending the bombing. It does not include ending the genocide, the repression, the occupation, the siege, the weaponization of hunger. It doesn't include any of that. And Secretary Blinken calls it a generous offer. A generous offer. How generous can you be in compensating for the death of a child, of a woman? How about 1,000 children? 10,000 children? How about 20,000 children and women? How do you compensate that? What kind of a generous offer is Israel making on the table today in return for its captives?
And, of course, we've had just here recently, the UN Security Council wanted to have a really low level action to recognize the Palestinians in the United Nations, which is a necessary precursor to a two-state solution, which Joe Biden has said from the outset that he wants. He wants a two-state solution, but the United States vetoed that resolution. Even some of our Western allies voted for it this time, but we vetoed it. And to add insult to injury, I believe it was the ambassador, certainly one of the U.S. Statements afterwards, is that we, quote, still support a two-state solution, even though we're gonna get rid of this. But that's not making people in Israel very happy. That's not enough. They always want more, and whatever we come up with, that gets thrown out there. So even though we're literally carrying the water for Israel, still they just poke their finger in our face.
I'm sure I've said this before, but watching these people, listening to them, it's not out of line to ask, do they have some type of dysmorphism with language? Like, do they not understand what the words mean? I mean, do they actually have a serious type of disability that prevents them from, how they had some kind of stroke where they don't understand what the words mean anymore? Because to say these types of things, either what you just showed, Danny, with Blinken saying, the only thing standing in the way of a ceasefire is Hamas, no one in the entire world believes that, as well as then the United States vetoing Palestinian statehood, but then saying that we are for Palestinian statehood. I mean, like the gaslighting and the disingenuous nature of the mendacity of all this, lying. We're dealing with psychopaths here. We're seeing people who will willingly get up, like Tony Blinken did, and say with a straight face that Israel is doing everything it can, providing generous offers to provide peace for the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people in Gaza, and we're supposed to believe that. And nobody believes it around the world. The only people who are entertaining what he's saying are us in the US and maybe some folks in the UK. Maybe that's it, There
are a lot. I assure you, there are a lot, especially in the United States, because they're not watching shows like this that will strip away that mask of mendacity and tell them what the truth is. That's the only thing they hear. And so when they hear it, they're like, okay, that must be true. Yeah.
Right. Yet we had that polling last month. I think it was at the end of March, that polling that found that only 52% of Americans could correctly state that more Palestinians have been killed by Israelis. So half of Americans didn't even know who have been killed. Right. I mean, so like right. I mean, so when you have that, so people in the US are susceptible to it. But again, that's it. And we're at the state now where the American Secretary of State believes that's okay. That is not a concern to him, that he can lie. He's not concerned about the repercussions from lying to the rest of the world, from disrespecting the rest of the world, from making himself look like a complete and total purchased fool by the Israelis to the world because they're so corrupted and they're so owned by whether it's interests of the American empire or say more direct interests like that of the Israeli lobby, that they're willing to do that. They're willing to go up there and just lie through their teeth, knowing everyone lies through their teeth, embarrass themselves this way, embarrass our country because they believe the alternative, telling the truth, will be too politically difficult, too politically costly for themselves individually, for their political party, as well as for the institutions they represent. And somehow they think that even if you are a proponent of the American empire, which you and I are not, but even say we were like proponents of the empire as it exists, we would still say objectively, this is not good for the U.S. But somehow they believe it is.
And let me tell you, Matt, here's another level where it gets even worse. Here's something else that the Secretary of State doesn't have a problem with, and that is being politically and diplomatically shamed. So we took one fair step, I would say. It's a small step in the bigger scheme of things, but a step nevertheless, in saying we're going to sanction an IDF battalion of ultra-Orthodox who's been causing lots of problems, doing lots of things in the West Bank especially. And in response, the Israelis weren't very happy about this. And in fact, they said harming one battalion is damage to the entire IDF. This is not the way to behave with partners and friends, the Secretary or Minister of Defense Gallant said in his statement, adding that he expected the Biden administration to change its decision. Quote, this could be a cry for generations and open a dangerous door to this type of action. How dare the United States do something that Israel said? I mean, it's right there in print, Matt. You don't even have to fill in the lines here, but if you can believe this, it gets worse because Benjamin Netanyahu went on Israeli television to directly address this. Check this out.
גן בחירוף נפש על צה"ל, על הצבא שלנו ועל הלוחמים שלנו. אם מישהו חושב שהוא יוכל להטיל סנקציות על יחידה בצה"ל, אני אלחם בזה בכל כוחותיי. כפי שהחיילים שלנו מאוחדים להגן עלינו בשדה הקרב, אנחנו מאוחדים להגן עליהם בשדה המדיני. בליל הסדר הזה ניצבים לנגד עינינו חטופינו בשבי החמאס. הסבל שלהם, הסבל של משפחותיהם, קורע את ליבנו ורק מחזק את נחישותנו להשיבם. איננו מרפים ולו לרגע מן המשימה הקדושה להחזיר אותם הביתה. לצערי, עד עכשיו, כל ההצעות לשחרור חטופינו נדחו על הסף על ידי החמאס. ולכן אמר בצדק מזכיר המדינה האמריקני, החמאס סירב לכל ההצעות שהוגשו לו. לדבריו, הדבר היחיד שמונע עסקה לשחרור החטופים הוא החמאס. ולכן, ננחית עליו מכות נוספות וכואבות, וזה יקרה בקרוב. בימים הקרובים נגביר את הלחץ הצבאי והמדיני על חמאס, כי זאת הדרך היחידה לשחרר את חטופינו ולהשיג את ניצחוננו.
Okay, we got to unpack several things here. He said a lot of things, but we'll start off at the beginning there. He says that he will resist with all of his strength anyone having the temerity to say anything to any one of our IDF soldiers. Who cares what they're doing? Doesn't make any difference if they're violating American law, if they're violating international law. How dare you say something to anything about us? And he will fight that as he's taken $14 billion of your tax dollars.
Right. The whole thing is just so outrageous, right? I mean, this is just so over the top. If you were to make a movie, Danny, where you have exactly this occurring, where the president of another country is taking our money while we support him in a massive, horrible, terrible war and genocide. He's incredibly corrupt. His own people hate him, though they are supportive of this genocide. But can you imagine a movie where that's the case? He's taking that money and then he speaks like that to the Americans who are giving him that money, right? How dare you, as he takes the money out of our hands. That people would say that's too over the top. That's never going to get made. Audiences aren't going to believe it.
Yeah, because it's not credible. No one's going to, even for a movie. That's dumb. That never happens in real life.
Right. And that's what we're witnessing. This is what we're witnessing. And people keep saying, how did the U.S. get in this position? Or the one I like the least is the United States is getting drawn into. Well, this is the United States. This is a codependent relationship. The United States has put itself in this position. It's set up structures to make sure this is the way this relationship works. It adheres to those structures. It does nothing to change the structures that allow for this relationship, basically this capture of the American political system by the Israeli lobby, by a foreign government, and there's other aspects to this as well. Don't want to make it out as if I'm saying it's only the Israeli lobby that is the reason for American policy towards Israel. There's other things as well. Military industrial complex, American foreign policy, the needs of the empire, et cetera, et cetera. These people actually believe it. Joe Biden, biggest Zionist in Washington, D.C., et cetera, et cetera. However, the point that you're getting to, right, is this idea of just how brazen this is, and how in any other aspect of life, in anything in your life and anything in your organization or your workplaces or your schools' lives, anything, what individual or institution would put up with this relationship, right? That would allow this thing to continue to happen where they are being essentially utilized as a tool for another's interests at their own expense, right? Not just an expense of sending money, right? But also an expense of like our credibility, who we are as a nation, who we are as a people. Long history of American abuses. Don't get me wrong on that. American wrongs in the past, American crimes, American wars that were terrible. However, in this current context, the way the rest of the world is looking at the U.S. and the way the U.S. is voluntarily isolating itself, the harm that the United States is doing to itself in terms of how it will be seen, respected, and more so how nations will actually deal with us. This isn't just about how people feel about it, but this is actually how other nations will deal with us and how other nations will choose to go with other countries, other opportunities, say like the BRICS, because they can't trust the Americans at all. And
can you bring that Axios piece up with a call out back up? I want to just reiterate one more time that you see that that the Minister of Defense of the country receiving our aid said that he expected the Biden administration to change his decision, and then warns that this will be a cry for generations and open a dangerous door for this type of action. I just can't believe what my eyes are reading right there on the screen right now. Is that how dare anybody tell us what we're going to do as they take all the billions of dollars from our hand? And here's the troubling part. We may do it. I don't know if they're going to, but we may comply to what's being told.
I'm sure they're going to do. I mean, the long list of things that if you watch the State Department briefings, Danny, I know you and Gary do. For a lot of folks here, if you don't watch them, at least you see people talking about those State Department briefings, and you see the reporters over and over and over again asking about, say, specific acts that have happened, specific pieces of video where we see Israeli soldiers committing clear war crimes. And the response from the Americans is always, we're very troubled by this, and we're going to ask for a full investigation, and we'll get back to you on it. And then they never get, because something else comes up, right? But, I mean, the amount of war crimes that the State Department spokespeople are about to get back to the reporters on, we'd be here to next, through next week if they ever chose to get back, because there's been so many, they all just supersede each other. And then because there are so many, they get forgotten about.
Yeah.
And there's something that's more pressing, more urgent, more current, more now, more interesting, whatever. And I think that's what the hope is here. So you throw this out there. The Israelis have a little temper tantrum, but you know what? They know that we're not going to go through with it, that this will get buried in the cycle of the media. Everyone will forget about it. If it gets brought up again, the State Department will say we still have it under review. Because that's one of the things that occurred last week, or the end of last week, was this revelation that the State Department, the career folks, the actual State Department officers, not the political appointees, but they had presented to the Secretary of State's office a long list of violations by Israeli military units. I don't think it was in Gaza. I think it all pertained to the West Bank, but a long list of violations by Israeli military units in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Things that constitute war crimes, essentially. They are an occupying army. These are violations of international law. This is a state of hostilities, essentially, when you have a country that's occupied militarily. These things are war crimes. And, what happened was these instances were presented to the Secretary of State's office, again, a long list of them, and the Secretary of State's office sat on it. And so I think what you're trying to see now is some damage control. Okay, we'll take one out of many, many, many individuals and units that need to be sanctioned, that need to be held accountable. We'll talk about one. And then, of course, the Israelis freak out about that. They're very indignant. Their self-righteous anger is, what we expect from them. And, then, of course, what will happen is that this will get then forgotten about. And maybe somebody will bring it up 2 or 3 months ago. But this is the way the Israelis operate over and over and over again. They're very good at this. And I shouldn't say the Israelis, a lot of people, if you go to public relations school, they will teach you this. So corporations do this as well as governments, right? The idea of like, get something out there, make it seem like you're doing something. And, by the time anyone ever looks at it, it's going to be forgotten. Good example of the Israelis are a couple of years ago, they claimed they raided like 20 or 30 charities and NGOs, including Israeli human rights organizations. They took their computers and they said these people are connected to terrorists. And so then by the time an investigation is actually done, when of course nothing is shown where there's no evidence at all that these people are connected to terrorists, it's been 5 months and it's not news anymore and they've forgotten about it. And that'll be how it'll be with UNRWA as well. How much attention do you think this revelation today, not this revelation, but this announcement today by the UN that Israel still has not provided any evidence to support their allegations against UNRWA? How many people are going to, how many places are going to cover that? How many people are actually going to hear about that? Meanwhile, when Israel announced these accusations, when they slandered UNRWA back in January, the whole world heard about it.
Everybody paid attention.
Now, 3 or 4 months later, maybe it'll get on page 7 in a small, little article.
Meanwhile, they've been held guilty in the minds of all these people without any worries about that.
I want to what's the line, Danny, right? The truth goes halfway around the world before a lie goes halfway around the world before the truth even starts, or however that goes.
Yeah. And we see that play out all the time. And unfortunately, it's effective.
Yeah.
So it's going to continue on. I want to look at the last thing that Netanyahu said in that patch was given a strong implication that they are about to start a Rafah operation. They've been doing preparation of the battlefield. They've continued to blow up people. A bunch of kids and women were blown up over the weekend again. Again, it hardly makes a ripple here because that's almost routine. But he's making it pretty clear that they're getting ready to go in on a big one because, as he claims, they have to, quote, get the final 4 battalions out of southern Rafah, out of southern Gaza, so that they can win the war. Now, as I think you and I have talked about on many occasions, both on and off the air, this is just laying the groundwork for the future insecurity for Israel. Even if you take all the morality out of it for the moment, don't even look at the Palestinian side in terms of what it's doing to them, but just look at the Israelis' part. Netanyahu has his country on a path that cannot succeed. They will not bring peace to their people. And I want to show you one of the reasons why. And I'm going to show you a clip here. I think it's a couple of weeks back from a Palestinian woman, apparently quite a famous in the Palestinian world, Hanan Ashrawi, where she's asked about how all this is impacting on the Palestinian people. Check out what she says, and then I'll point out why I played this on the backside.
They are starving people to death. They are destroying universities and schools. They're killing people, carrying this out all in plain sight, and just not getting any kind of accountability, but getting rewarded for it. And not only that, but major powers being complicit in it, like the US, for example. Countries that are still sending weapons while seeing that there is a clear genocide taking place. And that's why I say every single Palestinian is traumatized. Every single Palestinian feels a deep, deep, deep sense of grief, of sorrow, of being personally involved and engaged in this horrific genocide and massacre of the innocents. It's totally, totally intolerable and unacceptable.
She talks about this deep, deep sense of grief, of sorrow. And anybody who knows anything about grief, there are 5 stages. And one of those is anger. And I can assure you that is coming. And when she talked about the entire population, whatever level of anger there was toward Israel at the beginning, on the 6th of October, before all this stuff flopped, it's off the charts now. And it's going to be possibly unprecedented. I don't know if in modern human history there has been anything like what's coming. So Netanyahu is building all the seeds to this for future instability for the entire region, but most especially for his people. And I wonder if you could just talk about that, because we've seen it, you and I, in our combat operations on a comparatively low level. But what do you think that this is going to do to the future of the region, of the Palestinian people, and of Israel?
Right. I'm reminded, Danny, I was just talking with somebody else a few days ago. We were talking about World War II, and we were talking about when the Red Army went into Germany, and I believe the Soviets called it the revenge for everything, and the actions of the Red Army in Germany at the end of World War II was exactly that, revenge for everything. And that the Palestinians, that could apply to them. That may apply to them. That might apply to them in the sense of that. How could this have occurred to you on top of the decades and decades of war against you, essentially, the ethnic cleansing and then the occupation and the humiliation that have occurred continually for generations, and then now this to occur? And how could you not want revenge for everything? And particularly when you look at the scope of the genocide in Gaza, it covers everything. Everything is systematically and deliberately being destroyed. They're destroying any greenhouse they come across. The Israelis destroy it. I mean, you name any part of the infrastructure that is in any way integral to a functioning society, and the Israelis are deliberately destroying it, let alone, of course, targeting and killing civilians, in particular, as we found out with our understanding of how the Israeli AI systems work, choosing to kill resistance or militant or Hamas fighters and leaders, not when they are away from their families, but when they're with their families, making that deliberate choice, utilizing their AI systems to kill armed resistance members when they are with their families as well as their neighbors, as opposed to being able to, they could target and kill them when they're away, but they're choosing to target and kill them when they go home. So how can you not want revenge for everything? It gets to this idea of what we were talking before about this hope by the Israelis to carry out their ethnic cleansing by getting this, quote, voluntary migration, unquote. And that's not going to work. I mean, we talk about it as their plan, but it's not going to work. Maybe some will leave, but most will not. They are, the Palestinians have an ethos of what they call samud, which is steadfastness. And there's been some Israeli commentators in the last few weeks who have been shocked that there are still hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in northern Gaza who are living amongst nothing but rubble and the buried dead. That's all that's there. And they have chosen to remain because they will not give in. Anyone who doesn't understand this, go back to Gladiator, that great opening scene when the Romans are fighting the Germans. And, one of the Roman generals turns to Russell Crowe, the head Roman general, and he says, why won't these people learn they've been defeated? And Russell Crowe replies back, would you know when you're defeated? Would you? What would you do? Like that type of thing. Any of us, what will we do if this was us, our family? So what this means then, to your point, and I'm getting to your question, is that the consequences are exactly right. This desire for revenge, that the resistance that was very hardened, very sincere, very deeply held because it had, just a very deep reaching and fundamental grievances and reasons underlying that resistance, the occupation. Well, that has only been stoked. That has only had fuel poured on it. So what we saw before in terms of Palestinian resistance to occupation going back for the decades, that will be nothing like we have seen. So this idea that somehow the Israelis are now going to garrison Gaza, reports I saw a week or two ago talked about mobilizing 2 reserve infantry divisions and putting them there. Like this idea that you're going to now have to expend those resources, put those young men and women into a garrison of an incredibly hostile population where the insurgency is fully supported by the people. fully supported. You know, all this talk about, well, maybe Hamas has lost 8,000 people, maybe they've lost 12,000, maybe it's 18,000. It doesn't matter because they have gained tens of thousands. Anyone they've lost on that battlefield, their rifles have been picked up by their brothers, by their cousins, by their sons, by their grandsons. And so it will go. There is no end out of this for Israel other than complete and total victory, right? The complete and total success of an ethnic cleansing campaign, which, as we're discussing, is not going to happen. It's not going to work. Or else I don't believe it's going to work. Might, but I don't believe it's going to work. And then what's your other option then, right? You're going to garrison in it and you're just going to go through these motions again with hoping at some point that something is different. Now, maybe there's those cynical enough, and I believe the ruling government in Israel is composed of many people like this, that see that type of insurgency, that violence, that resistance as helpful to them politically, because that gives them a foreign enemy, even though you're occupying them. It's a foreign enemy that justifies and underlines who you are, your political identity. So maybe it is helpful for many in power in Israel to have this type of foreign resistance, again, even though you're occupying them.
Yeah.
But then then what's the third thing though? The third thing then is a political negotiation, which seems even farther away.
Right.
Than it was
Yeah.
6
And
months
Matt,
ago.
let me ask you, because we're about running out of time here. In the last few minutes we have here, I wish we could make a decision at our government level on morality, on what's right, just on basic human morality. That doesn't seem to be on the table here. But what about political pressure on the current administration as we're getting closer and closer into the presidential election? If Netanyahu does make good on his claims and threats here and does move into Rafah and the civilian casualties go up, we've already seen that a lot of voters in America, both those from the Middle East and just regular Americans, are just aghast by this kind of thing, and they've been making protest votes so far. What is the possibility, if this gets even worse on the humanitarian level, that it will have an impact on the election, meaning that would finally make Biden do something he doesn't want to do so he doesn't lose the election? Do you see any of that playing out?
I don't think Biden will change. I think they'll stay. I won't call it samud and steadfastness. I'll call it wooden-headedness, or being so corrupt and so bought off and so politically cowardly that they won't. Right? They're so obstinate, and this is how they've operated for decades. They won't. But will the Democratic Party, if the Democratic Party loses the White House because of this, as well as down ballot seats, because people didn't turn out in those few close races around the country, that lower turnout, because I'm not going to vote for Biden, which means you don't vote at all, which means those down ballot races don't get any support. Well, does that then give the Democratic Party the calculus to say, you know what, taking this money from the Israeli lobby is not in our interests? I mean, like, we're reaching here a bit, Danny, but there is that possibility. The Democratic Party, through the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, they've not shown that in the past, that where I feel confident that's going to happen, but that potentially is there. So this is a bit of a strategy of hope that somehow those within the Democratic Party will wake up and understand that this is hurting us. This is hurting our institution. We may have thought in the short term to continue to take the Israeli lobby money and do everything they say and go along with this genocide at the expense of millions of progressive voters was the right calculation for us. We made that mistake. That didn't work out. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to readjust, and we are now not going to take AIPAC's money. We're not going to allow this type of contribution, and we are going to go for voters, the majority of the country, that are in favor of us having a different policy towards Palestine and Israel. And then these people aren't going to all of a sudden start wearing keffiyehs, right, and start chanting from the river to the sea. But, at least maybe there'd be that shift away from the determination of the Democratic Party to be slavishly tied to the Israeli lobby. It's described as the way the Republican Party is tied to the NRA, that the Democratic Party is tied to the Israeli lobby, in particular AIPAC, and then DMFI, the Democratic Majority for Israel. So that's been a description of it. Will this be enough if they lose the elections in 2024? And you wonder about that, whether or not they have the people there who are willing to make that decision. I don't think they really do. So I think what happens is you're going to see the same things occurring, where you're going to have until we fix primarily our campaign finance system, until we don't allow special interests to purchase our politicians, whether it's on gun control or Israel or on
Whatever. Yeah.
whatever, right? Pharma, I mean, like, then we will have these problems and we will always expect this to occur. You can have 90% of the American public be against Israel. And it doesn't matter. The Congress is going to vote for Israel, just like 90% of the American public is in favor of certain gun regulations, and the Congress is not going to do it. So I think that is a very good question, but it doesn't mean that we should abandon that pressure. It doesn't mean that that
right.
pressure is one of the best methods we have. We've already seen some aspects of it come to play, not in any way it's made a meaningful difference on the ground there in Gaza, which of course that's everything. But in terms of understanding our political system and seeing how the White House is being terrorized by people on the ground at every campaign stop they go to about this issue, the way they've been hurt, the way that they are having these concerns that we're going to lose the election because of this. Okay, does that in the long term have an effect? But certainly it hasn't done anything to stop the bombs and the
right.
we
got to do whatever we got to do when the opportunities. Well, listen, thanks for coming on today, Matt, and providing the clarity on this. As always, these things they're hard to look at because they have such profound human cost and carnage on a daily basis, like some of those images that Gary was showing a second ago, that a little kid trapped in the rubble. That's one of thousands that happen like that. But we're going to keep the pressure on. We're going to keep doing shows like this that bring it to the attention. We're not going to go quietly. We're going to remain unintimidated and show, even if it's politically unpopular, it's true, it's real, and it has consequences. And for our own morality, we're going to continue to do it. Thanks for coming on and providing such clarity today.
Hey, thank you, Danny.
And we thank you guys for watching too, because we appreciate you a lot that you come here to find out the truth, and we're going to keep giving it to you. I ask you to come back actually pretty quick from now, about 2 o'clock. We're going to talk about some other problems that we've got with some zeal for war that Lindsey Graham has. And we're going to unpack some of that so you can see what the truth is there, so you know what's going on and what's not. Tune in here at 2 o'clock, and we'll see you shortly on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.